Hello, guys. Welcome back to the 706 episode. If you're listening in the highlighted order on our page, you will have just heard Monkey Shines, Halloween episode number 1. This is Halloween episode number 2 of 75. This episode is on The Empty Man, which is a feature film by director David Pryor that came out last year and has kind of found a bigger audience this year as it's come out on streaming services. And I'll introduce my co-host real quick, and then I'll kind of introduce the film, and then we'll go through our first impressions. So why don't we have Anthony, Connor, Kirk introduce themselves?
Anthony.
Take care in the night and clean up your toys, for the empty man eats bad little boys.
Interesting. And Tony, I just want to add a clarification for those that are listening in the archives basement in BC in the year 2085. When he says last year, he means 2020. So this movie came out in 2020. Tony, you got to think for posterity. You know, this isn't such a temporally insignificant thing.
Kirk, you seem to have forgotten about the concept of metadata, which this episode has, like all other episodes, stating the year and title. All right, guys. So it's Halloween, spooky time. We like to have a little spooky fun on this program a little bit, dipping our toes in it a little bit here and there. So The Empty Man is a horror film that came out in 2020, directed by David Pryor. As I said, it found a limited release by 20th Century Fox in its initial run, and it was basically just kind of dumped by the studio, for lack of a better word, because it got a kind of a poor test screening reception. They were having a lot of creative differences with the director in terms of, you know, what is this? What are you making? And kind of different from their expectations. And so they dumped it out in theaters, and nobody really saw it. And what critics did see it kind of dismissed it. And then in the intervening months, more people started to kind of discover this movie and talk about it. And there's kind of a potential cult resurgence. So that's kind of why I wanted to bring it on today and explore this a little bit. What is The Empty Man? And basically the premise of the movie is that there is this teenage girl who's gone missing in this small town, which I'm not sure is ever identified by name. And our main character, who's a former police officer with a tragic past, decides to investigate this disappearance. And on her mirror is written, "The empty man made me do it." There's this kind of mythological figure known as the Empty Man. And if you blow into a bottle and think about him at night on a bridge, he will come for you, essentially, abbreviating it. So that's what the movie is. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to my co-host to get a little bit of first impressions, because I don't think any of them have seen this before. And this week, I want to start with Anthony. So Anthony, are you an empty man or are you a full man after seeing this movie?
Well, I believe you got to stare into the abyss until the abyss stares back at you. And only then do you see the manifestation of your memories, the truth, on, and every other thing they say in this movie. Okay, I had not heard of this movie before. I picked it last time after being sort of disappointed by the Treehouse of Horror presentations, you know, that were mine to kind of rife through. And going in, I got to say, first thing is I admire the movie's ambition. Like, I actually, you know, pretty impressed by the willingness to kind of do what it does. Yeah, it's based on a graphic novel I saw in the credits, but, you know, it really tries for something at times. But I could kind of sum up my feelings about the movie in one scene, which is very early on, as our sort of lead character or detective, or our former detective, is kind of sitting in a car with the friend of the girl who has gone missing. And in the background, we see this high school. This high school is named the Jacques Derrida High School, which is not real, not a real thing, but it's interesting, right? The movie wants, I think, to reach for something. It wants to be very smart and intelligent. At times it is. At other times it gets lost in what it wants to be. And I think that becomes kind of a disservice to it, because as we go through, we start off with a sort of interesting little movie on its own about the sort of explorers in the ice in the Himalayas, and kind of an interesting moment, really the most gruesome probably moment of the film. Then we get about 4, 5, maybe even 7 or 8 other movies by the time we get to the end. We get a sort of detective moment. We get a classic teenage boogeyman story all these sort of different things that want to do something. I just don't fully find them to fit. There are scenes and moments though I do really like, and little images that really actually did creep me out. But ultimately, I was a little dissatisfied by the end, and I just felt, and probably one of my least favorite complaints about something ever, it just felt a little too long. By the time I got to the end, I felt out of breath. I felt a little fatigued. I could have had some of these answers sooner. When they try to bring in philosophy and other terms, honestly, if they had cut them down, if they had left them a bit short, a little bit more vague, I think some of this mythology of this religion, this cult, would be a lot more hard hitting, a lot more fascinating. But ultimately, it's kind of a sign of the movie, I think, which is it tries for something. And I don't know if it fully lands. So I was interested in the movie. I don't know if I fully enjoyed watching the movie, but it was fun to see something kind of surprising, something I hadn't heard about. And I did look afterwards to see the kind of resurgence from people like David Fincher and Guillermo del Toro, who seemed to like it. So I got to say, maybe there is something there I'm missing. Maybe the other two will have something to say that will bring me more into the movie's grip.
Okay. That's fair. I think that's a pretty reasonable, like I can definitely see everything you're saying, and I can kind of think of the moments you're talking about. But next I want to go with Kirk on this one.
Yeah, so The Empty Man, huh? It's hard watching this veritable kind of battlefield wasteland of missed opportunities that is The Empty Man, when we could have been watching Michelle Pfeiffer and Harrison Ford in What Lies Beneath. But alas, there's always next year where we can actually watch a real horror film. No. This is interesting. I guess I would sum it up by saying there's a lot to chew on in this film. There's a lot on which to masticate, that is for sure. And at times it feels rather gratuitous. At times it's like a knowing kind of wink, like we're going to throw a bunch of kind of paradoxes at you and try to engage in some mental gymnastics and some new age bullshit, but really we're subverting that, where in the end it kind of like, okay, so I would say that the last half hour of the film, the film is like 130 minutes, the last half hour kind of kills the movie for me, because it's almost like they got high on their own supply. And there was this really kind of interesting film developing that was a social critique of, like, I don't know, it felt quite kind of steeped in atheism and atheistic tendencies, and like a broad cautionary tale of moral panic and the hysteria that might be associated with organized groups of thought and form over the millennia. But I think it just strayed away from that towards the end. Like, so I guess my working thesis, and I always like to have a working thesis while I watch a movie. I always like to know where I stand, what the director is trying to tell me, or screenwriter, whomever. At the beginning, I was like, okay, so The Empty Man is almost right when we had that kind of discovery of the 5 teenagers hanging from the bridge after blowing through the bottle. So it's like, okay, The Empty Man is almost, it's a construct that's created, or that's, the police chief even said, it's communicable. Like it's this kind of deleterious moral construct that's obviously exaggerated in the film, but it is a movie. And so this movie's kind of teaching us about how virulent and easily propagated harmful ideas are, and how we can talk ourselves into basically anything. We can talk ourselves into going insane. We can talk ourselves into enlightenment. We can talk ourselves into suicide. And that's what I got from the film. And it was kind of like, there was like this anti-religion bent that I kind of understood it to convey. But towards the end, when they're actually making him the empty man, I was really confused. I think the film just got kind of the muck and the mire. It really didn't make too much sense towards the end, where he's like interrogating the kid who he sprayed with the pepper spray, and the kid is just spouting bullshit. And I understand that it's like, it's meant to sound like bullshit. I get that. But him being actually a manifestation, our main character played by John Badge Dale, I think his name is, James Badge Dale, something like that. this guy who's never held a lead in his life. You know, I've never seen him in anything except for I saw on his credit list he was in The Departed for like 8 seconds. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I don't know. It was an interesting artistic choice. I feel like the end felt a little muddled. I would just some other kind of random observations. I really like how the first kind of vignette was set up. I think that most horror films, when they have this kind of origin story, they usually do it in a much more succinct and almost rushed way. This one felt like there was some really good pacing and really dramatic moments, intense moments. And, you know, that was a good 20-25 minutes there. And so it almost felt like Anthony said, like a new film, which I was okay with. It was akin to when we watched Sorcerer, right? Remember Sorcerer? There's all these criminals around the world are being put into these situations. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it really circled back well enough. It was unclear to me whether or not the hiker from the 90s was actually a manifestation. And I think I'm getting too into the weeds, and maybe to my own fault. But it's like, so there's this devil presence, this like dark, chaotic presence. Then there's these antennae, these people who are like the chosen ones, who is the hiker and our main character. And then there are empty men who are, I guess, like our mental constructs. So anyways, I won't go on and on. I will say though that for some reason, the director or the costumer of this film felt like everyone under the age of 29 was a model for Urban Outfitters for some fucking reason. And that really annoys me. When everybody's dressing, you know, nobody dresses like that, especially in Missouri, St. Louis, Missouri. Are we kidding me? Anyways, that was just a random musing. It was enjoyable, but it was like chasing its own tail at times. I appreciate the effort and the audacity to kind of tackle this type of project. But at the same time, I can understand the studio being like, oh, we thought we were going to get some sort of Candyman rehash. And instead we got this psychobabble garbage. Like, what is this? And, you know, it can't carry its own weight. But anyways, I'm still mixed. So I didn't dislike it. There were times I really liked it. But yeah, that's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you, Kirk. And I will say that when those 8 seconds of The Departed were taken out at one test screening, audiences universally rejected the film. So just so you know, James Badgedale, he's got more going on than you think. All right, Connor, why don't you bring us home? And I know, Connor, you're seeing what's going on here. You're not liking it. You're upset. You're like, how do I sweep in? How do I save the day? And I think this is your chance, Connor, to be that guy, to save Halloween. Save Halloween.
Tony, sure, and I'm glad you brought up the reason for the season or the Scream season or whatever, which is Halloween. It's Halloween season. The prompt was a Halloween movie, and I really can't think of any movie that better captures the Halloween spirit than The Empty Man. You know, I really admired its mischievous whimsy, its laughs, its you know, sort of carnivalesque spirit of subverting you know, and making the children laugh, you know. So that was a great Halloween movie, you know, unlike say Ed Wood, you know. The Empty Man himself, you know, I think is just such an amazing addition, you know, to our gallery of ghoulies, you know, our classic villains. And I can expect to see a lot of, you know, kids wearing their Empty Man outfits this Halloween. So I have to say, my opinion is substantially similar to my two co-hosts. Like, I am pretty negative. Like, I had a problem throughout the movie of like, I wasn't gripped, I wasn't grabbed. I had moments when we actually saw, I guess, the person who's not the Empty Man, but the devil kind of figure with the many like fingers. I'm like, okay, I'm intrigued. Like, those are the moments where I'm like, ooh, like, you know, I want to see it. But then this kind of more kind of procedural kind of horror movie stuff just did not grab me. And it's hard to say. I mean, I've had this problem with horror movies, and I don't know what it is and how I can avoid it. And despite intellectually understanding that, okay, we need this kind of setup and payoff, and, you know, there's a formula here that I wouldn't object to a formula in any other case, but the formulaicness is a problem for me. But I guess more than that, more than the formulaicness, I guess the kind of, there's an element of boredom to my watching, which didn't succeed in grabbing me. I guess the biggest offender, and the thing that I think the rest of my co-hosts mentioned, the biggest offending factor is it's ambition, right? It's kind of, there's a sort of pretentiousness to it. I think Anthony's right in calling it like ambition, and it's a kind of a cool ambition, to unite all of these kind of classic horror movies, these smart horror movies, and smart movies in general. It has an element of Memento. It's got an element of Rosemary's Baby. It's got an element of, Blade Runner. It's got an element of all these things. And it tries to kind of run the gamut from the kind of the mysterious, frightening East to the kind of clinical, sort of hospital, kind of aesthetic that's can be frightening, and then back to, all the like sewers and, kind of dark autumn nights. And, it kind of tries to get you all the kind of notes of horror, kind of in one movie. And I think it tries to unite those things under this kind of very like vague intellectual idea. And I think it's just very like muddled to me. Like, I don't get what the empty man is. Obviously at the end, there's some sort of like, meta filmic. Another thing I thought it was like Stanley Parable, it felt kind of like, we created you, you're made up, like we made you up to be in our story. Like, isn't this crazy? Like, it's true though, because like he's made, like they wrote the character, that kind of thing, which I felt was like, okay, I guess I can see a like a very interesting version of that. But like, to me, it's lame. It misses the kind of point of what they were trying to do. Is they were trying to, I think they should have stuck with the theme of making Buddhism scary again. I think that's what they were trying to do. And I think we kind of lost the plot towards the end, right? But like, it should have been, frightening Buddhism. Like, what is it like? The way they want to believe that nothing exists? Like, what's wrong with them? And I think they should have interrogated that and tried to like establish like the true anxiety of pure nothingness. And with the Nietzsche thing too, Nietzsche like had his whole like argument against Buddhism, because like you can't ultimately, you accept the emptiness, but you have to have the illusion of something existing, that kind of thing, right? So it's like they could have gone there, but then it's just kind of like, it just kind of turns into this kind of collection of vague ideas that seem profound, but I didn't find really. But I'm sure Tony and I'm sure all of these like, great film contrarians have a lot of cool takes and have kind of pulled it all together, to have like a really cool reading of it. So I'm curious to hear what he says before I totally write it off. But in that sense, I enjoyed its kind of ambition, but I was also kind of bored with its kind of what I thought was kind of formulaic.
So you thought that, for one thing, that the kind of the theme of this nothingness wasn't really engaged with in like a deep way, right? Is that what you're saying? And then
yeah.
But I have to ask you before I go into my thing, what did you find formulaic about it specifically?
I just think of the beginning with the kind of setup of, the four, young people out on this trip, and kind of, you kind of know where it's going from the very start. And, then of course, with our main character being the kind of detective and kind of, and I kind of expected that at the end he was going to enter a room and then he would see someone he knew, and the person would tell him like, you don't really know what's going on, and then he'd be like, no, like I knew that was coming, and the kind of like the flashbacks to the dead wife and kids and that kind of thing. There was a nice element of the added slow motion thrusts of the main character, the sexual thrusts of the main character, which are beautiful to see. But that was kind of breaking the mold in a way. But otherwise, I felt like in that sense, I mean, overall, I agree that it's less formulaic than it is, kind of wacky in its ambition to combine all these elements. But to me, like in my moment-to-moment experience of watching it, I think things that were supposed to kind of hook me and kind of make me feel like I was engaged in the movie, things that were trying to make me kind of comfort me and make me feel like I knew what was going on, those things kind of bored me rather than made me feel like I was engaged to continue on the story.
No, I think I understand what you're saying. Yeah, no, remarkably similar temperature from the three of you, which is fine. I can't promise to have some kind of grand explanation that ties everything together and justifies this movie as like a new cult movie or whatever you want to call it, or a great film or whatever. But I will say that some of the complaints or some of the formulaicness Connor mentions, I think, in that metafilmic way is part of the point, right? In terms of these specific elements, like particularly the backstory with the wife and the child, right? you have this character who is a former cop, and the whole point, what I love about this character and James Badgedale's performance is there is, I think, there's an authenticity to it, and that he really sells his kind of confusion, and he feels very much like a character we as an audience can kind of relate to and identify with in a very generic way of just like, we empathize with him, we feel this fear, we feel this moment to moment anxiety in these situations, right? But his backstory is so generic, it is so bland, right? The dead wife, it's such a cliche, it's such a trope, that, and he has no content beside that. He is truly an empty man. He has no other persona to him, right? Nothing for us to really grab onto. So it's a cliche, it's like a joke character almost, but the movie plays it straight. So at the end, when it reveals that he was in fact a fictional character, it sort of recontextualizes that. But what makes that interesting to me is it's sort of like he's a 2D cliche joke, but he also has a consciousness, right? He still thinks and feels. He lives his life and believes himself to be human, despite being told that he is not. So to me, there is something compelling about that. I don't know if that is like, maybe that is a little, I'm 14 and this is deep, I don't know. But I thought the way this movie presented this kind of character that we're following in a plot that's set up in one way kind of falls apart and inverts itself in these ways. As far as the opening too, with the four, young people on the hiking trip, and that being formulaic. I mean, it is in a sense, of course, that setup, right? There are four young people traveling, they're in college, they're somewhere they either shouldn't be or they cross some kind of line and they're punished. That's like the oldest slasher setup in the book, right? But the movie accelerates it such that we're through it in like 15 minutes. And then we're with a completely new cast of characters. I was reading an interview with the director, and he said that he was inspired by like The Exorcist and Sorcerer, having that kind of a foreign start or like this exotic location in another setting and then coming to new characters. And I liked it here because I liked its boldness. I liked its willingness to break kind of with our expectations of how the story is going to go. I like this movie for its atmosphere, its ambition, and its willingness to kind of subvert our expectations and play things around, because I think this is it is a pretentious movie. I think that is true in the same way that, True Detective season 1 is pretentious. You have these long monologues with Matthew McConaughey's character, and the kind of philosophical dialogue we get in this movie feels very similar to True Detective. And then it's very explicit. It's very like, you're just laying out these themes just unadorned, just saying them for the audience, and perhaps trying to dramatize them, but not always succeeding. I'm sure that they went into it trying to dramatize this theme as well as they could. Now, whether they succeeded, that's for you to decide. I think they did well enough for me. So anyway, that was a very rambling kind of explanation, but I think that is my kind of affection for the movie and why I kind of find something of value in it. I liked its willingness to go there. So I guess I'll start with, and this could be for anybody, is what do you think this movie could have maybe focused on? Because I think the consensus here among you guys is that the movie kind of lacks a focus. It's a little too big for its britches. What would you have liked to see the movie maybe nail in on a little more, or focus in on, or what was a more productive direction do you think they could have gone so that it would have been more to your preference? I mean, I start with Anthony, but anybody can say.
Well, let's see. We had a friend of ours who gave us a book recommendation once. It was by an author named Dan Fox. It's called Pretentiousness, Why It Matters. Now, let me use some of the arguments to defend this movie. Now, actually hearing what you said, Tony, about the sort of blandness of his backstory and the sort of meta commentary of generic characterization, I guess, and the sort of statement, right, about creation. And then I think Connor was the one who made the joke about the sort of Stan Lee menace or warning almost like to the sort of comic creator. And we get that opening with an H.P. Lovecraft-esque feeling to it. And thinking about that, I think it's curious. It becomes a thing. It's right. Like if you want to make a story, if you want to tell a story about like that inherently criticizes, dissects, or interrogates character, blandness, cliches, and tropes. Like one of the hard things about doing that is how do you make your own story not bland, cliche, and generic? seems to be kind of a central issue. It's funny because this movie, in a weird way, or once I heard that anyway, this movie in a weird way reminded me of another one we watched off the podcast. It was Neruda, and the way that director Pablo Larraín brought in a sort of fictionalized detective who knew he was fictional to interrogate the sort of politics of Chile and the sort of detective trope. Here, I think because of the movie's sort of breadth, it wants to kind of tackle the horror genre. It wants to tackle religion, cultism, blandness, the way we kind of bring in things. Ultimately, it kind of feels like it can't actually break through to say something about the kind of blandness. There's a moment that I think sums this up, not just the Jock Derrida line, but the moment where he comes out of the cult and the kind of building, and he looks at the guy and he says, Neil Cassidy, aren't you a little too young to be doing that Neil Cassidy type of routine about the kind of blonde-haired, swept-back hair, cigarette-smoking guy who sheds cats? What kind of reference to, of course, On the Road, but it just doesn't do much, right? It falls kind of flat. There's something maybe in addition to wanting to add something, all the kind of different ways we think of teenagers, anti-counterculture items there. I'm kind of trying to figure out what to say, but it is a problem because I think the movie, that's how it kind of functions, right? It kind of presents different layers and different ideas of blandness and doesn't really do much to overcome it, maybe the way to phrase it. I don't really know. Kind of rambling. So
you're saying that fundamental problem with telling a story in this way is that, we want your story itself become cliched. You're saying this movie doesn't overcome that problem. It doesn't.
Yeah, by the end, right? It doesn't fully succeed, I think, in overcoming it, at least for me.
I'll agree with that, and I'll just get back to my original point of the last fifth of the film, just being like, I don't know, some guy on a dare. He's being dared to run down 42nd Street, naked, and then the last half block he throws on a raincoat. That's what it felt like. It felt like a safety blanket. This twist. Oh, maybe even as if the studio got involved. Maybe. I don't know what the source material states, but it was just it was going somewhere, and it really made sense to me. I was really kind of digging it. This idea of, and I don't even know is, I'm sure these are bastardized themes from other, kind of occult or new age organizations or followings, but the idea of like, what was it? Time plus concentration plus effort equals flesh or something. It was kind of interesting.
Yeah.
It's very, kind of hack, a little bit cheesy, but that's okay. I like the idea of, people being so extreme as to think that their thoughts can manifest something in the world like that. It's kind of interesting. And I guess it's, you look at it and then you contrast it with, our spiritual offerings in the present day and age. And that in and of itself is kind of a nice little critique, it provides a really cool contrast in this kind of horror backdrop. But, towards the end, it shifted from like, we create the empty man to like something along the lines of society creates us collectively who are all empty men or empty people. And, I that's what I was kind of getting from the meta narrative there is like, and it has something to do with technology. It has something to do with our ability to forget, our ability to start over, or to imagine possibility, to imagine change, to imagine a future. It's kind of interesting, but I would say that here's a little snippet. I paid way too much attention than I should have in parts of this movie. And when he was filling out the questionnaire in the center, which clearly it was like meant to be some sort of, it was like almost in the same universe as the Master, right? I thought immediately of the Master when I saw that, kind of this quasi Scientology organization entity. He was filling out these forms, and the statements were meant to be somewhat ludicrous, right? Like, and you're meant to say agree, disagree. It's almost like a personality inventory. The brain can itch. Society is meant to fail. society is nothing if it doesn't fail or something. Anyways, there were a couple there that were confronting the concept of binary genders. There was one that was like, menstruation is not a prerequisite for gender identity, and it's like, is the director like inherently anti-trans? Because he's drawing this comparison between like the idea of trans and these clearly like almost insane ideas. But anyways,
Well, I think the thing with that is that we don't know which side they want you to say true or false to. You know what I'm saying? Like for that question,
Do you think so?
yeah, I don't think it's necessarily like they're looking for people they're trying to make people anti-trans or something. I think it was like they're testing their underlying preferences for certain things.
Oh.
And maybe this is cheating, but in the interview I had with the director, his kind of explanation of it was like people's like of hierarchy and older systems of meaning, or like those systems are bullshit, we need to destroy them. That was like the through line for the questions.
Right. And where does transness sit on that, right? One of the questions is genders are completely distinct or something like that.
Yeah.
Like there's a binary, there are two distinct categories. Obviously, we should expect that the cult, in its kind of chaotic attitude towards the world, its embrace of nothingness, that it would reject any categories.
Yeah.
Which itself would be kind of the woker point of view. But we also know that the cult itself is evil. So that's what Kirk is saying, that it implies that, by making that the implied position of the cult, he would be kind of taking a stand against that. I don't think that's quite true. I think that's kind of just interesting, it almost lures you into the cult, because you see how when you think about categories, they break down, right? And therefore, couldn't these other things break down? But overall, I felt that the movie was almost hysterical about the fear of the nothingness, but I guess I could be wrong about that.
Also, they try to, like, the Stephen Root character is kind of interesting. We're meant to see him as charismatic and kind of endearing, not too flashy, right? Someone that we could, talk to, have an earnest conversation with, almost like a paternal figure, or avuncular figure. I don't know, but it was just I don't know. I think they did a really good job of kind of setting that up. But then, I mean, I don't want to get off track here, but does anybody have any sort of cogent explanation for the end? Like, I guess in one question, like, who is the empty man in both a literal sense and also in terms of a meta perspective? Or C, does it not matter at all?
C. No, I feel that, it's two ideas. There's two main ideas that are being played with here. One is, this nothingness that can, I don't know how this relates to the beginning, but the theme of nothingness and meditation on nothingness, and it's a take on the Buddhist, kind of credo that nothing is real. That takes, immense amounts of meditation and an extreme amount of experiential practice to reach this realization that's fundamentally true, right? For those who have really thought about it and really live in the embodied world as much as possible, that nothing is real ultimately, right? And I think that's a very interesting idea. Obviously, I don't think they just go with it. They don't take it very far, and we kind of lose it, and then it's replaced by a slightly, to me, less interesting idea of there are empty men who are not real, because if it's the case that nothing is real, conversely, everything that is not real is real. Everything that is only imagined is real, right? Which I'm not sure if that's a Buddhist kind of idea, but it's an interesting kind of pendant, to it, right? That you can create things with your mind. And I guess there is the Tulpa idea, is some concept of being able to create beings with your mind. But it just felt like those are two different things, because you'd think that the empty man should be a thing that maybe we're all empty men, and maybe just thinking about something for long enough, right? A thing loses its meaning, a thing loses its thingness by just you thinking about it. And also this idea of repetition, which Stephen Root's character mentions, this idea that, and I don't know if this is thought of, but I mean, it's a powerful, fundamentally familiar idea, the old children's game. It's not really a children's game, but where you repeat something to yourself, a lot. You say your own name and it ceases to have any meaning, right? Which is a very interesting idea. Like, why is that? And I think that's kind of, theoretically, right, the idea of this, what kind of this meditation practice can teach you. When you experience to the maximum, you kind of realize that it kind of, the newness and realness of the world kind of wears itself out, and it appears that nothing is real. But like, for this, I feel like they're almost saying, if we connect the sort of the meta-filmic or the like meta-fictional, because I would say, like, that seems to be what the empty man is kind of referring to. It's not referring to people like us, but rather referring to like fictional characters, that we can create fictional characters. To me, it feels like a meta-fictional kind of referencing, fiction itself. This idea of repetition then suggests, like, well, maybe it's like a meta commentary on how, like, when we see tropes or characters or, story elements repeated over and over again, they cease to seem real, right? So that's kind of where I'm trying to connect the dots there. But I wish I had something cooler than that. But that's just a kind of connection that I saw. And obviously it's supposed to be kind of, I think we're supposed to approach the idea of the nothingness of storytelling. I think we're supposed to be approaching that idea, but somehow maybe back away from it in the end or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, Connor. And I think that is an intentional connection because of Stephen Root's character says, like, a cliche is a cliche, right? And our main character's backstory is so not just cliched, but like a cliche of a cliche. It's like the most basic cliche of all time. There's no way that's not there's some level of that going on.
Yeah, I'm curious then. So Connor, let me see if I understood you right? Or let me add something if this works based on if I understood you right. The problem I have, or the kind of interesting and sort of uninteresting thing about their philosophy, though, is the sort of, to start with that Nietzsche quote again, stare at the abyss and eventually the abyss will stare back at you, right? What is, though, nothingness in the sense? If something is repeated enough times to lose meaning, it had to have meaning in the first place, or it had to establish significance at some point along the journey to then lose meaning. And what they do is they stare at, or they attempt to stare at nothingness, which is not true, right? They have a black poster that he walks by and he sees them staring at it. And the problem is they can never have nothingness because eventually they see something in the visage, the color of blackness, which is supposed to represent nothingness, but it's untrue because there's already something there for them to pull, right? So in the similar way, the way we read a book and add meaning because we imbue words with meaning through repetition, through some sort of significance, the emptiness, the empty man is a sort of, the way Kirk talked about it, a sort of self-eating snake here, the sort of Ouroboros, right? We're back to what the problem was in the first place, meaning. And the empty man is then the sort of meaningful man by the end, right? He's just filled with everybody's expectations, which is just cliches, stories, ideas, words, meanings, all sorts of different things. And it seems to be the problem of dissecting this movie too far along that route, right? Which would be true nothingness, is sort of the way Buddhism teaches it, would be a much more interesting kind of and harder thing to achieve in a movie, maybe. Sorry, I'm sort of thinking out loud and sort of rambling to Connor's statements.
No, I think that was the sort of thing I was looking, that I couldn't make the connection in my head. I think it feels like, if you just kind of think about it, there must be, like, they can't be agreeing with the idea of pure nothingness, and they must be somehow, like, maybe questioning, but ultimately reaffirming, like, the value of storytelling in the end. So I think that was the kind of thing. I think you connected the dots and made that kind of work. Like, I'm not sure if I absolutely see it myself, but it kind of makes sense. The issue of, like, when the void itself is kind of the substance, it's not really nothingness, and the empty man himself is kind of, maybe is more real than the rest of us, or something like that. Yeah, I think there's definitely there's probably a move for kind of a twist like that, or kind of irony like that, that's being invited, I think.
Sorry, Tony, if I dragged us into the the weeds here. That's my fault.
No, I think that this is a movie
that's how my brain works when I watch films. You know what I mean? Like, I really want, on a granular level, I feel like if I get too far away, if I drift too far away from perhaps the intended meaning, I feel a sense of loss almost. And that's kind of an interesting understanding of, like, how I ingest, how I approach movies. So it's just, yeah.
But I don't think the way I approach movies is that there is no essential meaning. It's our visceral experience in the moment of watching the movie that creates the meaning. The meaning can be anything, right? You can watch The Lion King and think it's the funniest movie of all time for whatever weird reasons you have, and that's the meaning it has to you. And you can try and share that. You can never truly share it, but you can try to convey that to other people through your words or whatever. But that to me is what it's mainly about. So I don't have like a grand wrap this all in a bow thing, but I do think this is a movie that invites this sort of discussion. I think David Pryor wanted us to like be tugging at these details, trying to figure these things out. So I think it's fine. I don't think this was ticky tacky, nitpicking. These were meaningful thematic questions we had to delve into. That being said, I do think it's probably time to move to the voting. And I mean, I know it's going to get in, so we could just skip this if you want, but otherwise we can go in the order we started with. So Anthony, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. There's a small, tiny ounce of me that gets a sort of sick pleasure out of Tony's frustrations here. It takes me back to a week ago in a little movie called Stoker. But okay, well, I will say one final point about this movie that I did think was interesting is, who I'm curious about is the real Nora on the other end of that phone, the person who doesn't know him and what's going on. That's kind of interesting to me. Okay, yeah, I gotta go no, Tony. Interesting watch, sometimes bored, sometimes too long. Good discussion out of it, I think. For the most part, though, yeah, it was a good Tony experience, but a no.
I feel like a little kid who's showing his picture to his parents, and it doesn't look like a horse. Anyway, Kurt, go ahead.
Tony, I like this movie. If I just don't think too hard about it, if I just take it for what it is, kind of look at the pretty pictures, hear the noises. I think the soundtrack was really kind of killer, actually, especially with the reverberation, of those deep atavistic chanting, and it's a cliche in and of itself, and I get that, but it seemed like there's a new spin to it. Also, mechanistically, I think was this like his directorial debut?
So before this, and I should have said this at the beginning, all he directed were like featurettes for David Fincher's DVDs, like behind the scenes documentaries or whatever. And that's all he ever did. This is his first movie.
Yeah, that's what I saw. So I would say, like, okay, there wasn't a lot of panache on display or a lot of kind of cute little artistic moments, but one that I noticed was when he was looking at the map, he throws the map on the car seat, and then they zoom in to the road, and that was kind of cool. It's like, we're getting this kind of really eerie transition. But in summation, I will say, all of the meaning and attempts to find meaning aside, I think that there were moments in this film that were actually spooky for me, and that's actually pretty hard because I'm quite desensitized to horror films. One that I will mention is just like the bonfire scene where all these people in the distance are circling this bonfire, and then it goes out, and then they're like, he takes a step back, they take a step forward. That was kind of creepy, actually. And, and there are other parts along the way that were interesting, and, in terms of the fear factor, which Connor had mentioned. So I will say this did have horror elements that drew me in, and I appreciate the ambition. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a yes, and I'm gonna lay this on Connor to decide. But yeah, I'll give it a yes.
Okay, I didn't know where that was going, Kirk. It could have gone either way. All right.
Yeah, it was suspenseful.
It is a piece of shit, and I didn't like it, but it was also the best movie I saw in a long time, and it really made me think. All right, Connor, you go ahead.
Yeah,
Finish
no, I'm
me off.
curious. I mean, I'm glad that Kirk brought up, like, how do we like this how do we approach this as a horror movie? And it didn't affect me at all as a horror movie. It seemed like it was completely, its filmic elements in our conversation, was completely overshadowed by this kind of mind-bending question. And that's interesting. In some ways, this is the kind of more the logos kind of side of things and side of criticism. I think Tony is a firm believer in the kind of the visceral, the truly aesthetic and emotional, like approach to film and how that's so important. So like we got our kind of, we got to use our Gallatin degrees, get our money's worth, I guess, to have a cool reading. I'm not sure how much of it is all there. I'm not sure how much of it is all there, but we arrived at something kind of cool, I thought, at the end. And typically when I think about something a lot and I find a cool narrative about it, I tend to like it a lot more. But I'm going to take Tony's philosophy seriously, that we need to have a visceral reaction. And I didn't have a moment where I'm like, sure, okay, I agree with the bonfire scene. That was cool. I liked when the bony man, I don't know, shows up at the end.
Xenomorph.
The xenomorph. Yeah. No, that was a very alien-esque moment. Those were some cool moments. But overall, I was a little, impatient with it. And, I think while we gave the ideas their due, I still think it was a bit kind of all over the place. So I'm going to say no, Tony. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, so you stabbed me with my own sword, huh? That was very low, Connor. I shouldn't have made that
out of
point.
respect. It's out of respect to your moral system. Your system.
I'm getting fired right now out of respect. No, it's okay.
This is Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. He opened the door. There's nobody there. What the fuck?
And the gun says visceral emotional reaction, and he sees it and he's like, oh my God, by my own logic. All right, that's fine. I appreciate the vote, Kirk. I'm still not sure if you like the movie or not, but thank you for
No,
voting.
I did. I overthought it, as I always do, as I have a capacity to, or a tendency to do. So yeah.
Yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, no, I mean, and honestly, like, yeah, like I don't think this movie's watertight. It's more that I think it's like a cool, interesting movie. I don't know that I call it a masterpiece or anything. I do think it's worth seeing though to anyone listening who hasn't seen it. So let's move on. So episode 75 is next, which we decided in episode 50 was going to be Cloud Atlas. So we don't have to decide for next week. But if you like, we can decide for episode 76 right now.
I'd say that makes sense, considering that we're on episode 75. We're going to have grand ambitions for our centennial. So perhaps we should nominate for 76. That is, if I'm ready, but if my co-hosts aren't, then I understand.
I may have seemed slightly unready just now, but I assure you I'm ready.
Oh, you got one. I know you got one.
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, great. All right. Well, in that case, what did we see? Let's see. Before this, we did. So yeah, Connor.
Sorcerer, right?
Sorcerer, that's right.
Okay, well, already. Wow. Time flies. Well, I'm going to, typically I go first, to put all my cards on the table and show how confident I am, but it's not out of lack of confidence, but instead out of strategy that I'll choose Anthony first, then myself, and then Kirk.
All right. Interesting. Okay. I'm going to pull a Tony and ask him 2 years. About first year, 1968, or 40 years later when you were born, 2008. Which year would you like?
Let's go 1968.
1968. Okay. This is kind of the more classic one. So I don't know if you've seen this. It's by Sergio Leone, sort of favorite of Tarantino, of course. It's one of my favorite Westerns of all time. It's Once Upon a Time in the West, starring Henry Fonda, Charles Bronson. Henry Fonda plays against type, a sort of villain. Pretty typical Western setup, but it's pretty much a story about a woman who kind of comes over to take control of her sort of deceased husband's ranch. And along the way, we kind of have Henry Fonda kind of haunting the kind of ranch to kind of convince her to leave. It's a very creepy, sort of very interesting movie. It's written by Dario Argento and Bertolucci. And it does something with the Western that's just so different. It's not kind of a John Wayne setup. I can't even describe it. It's just a very haunting sort of movie. I absolutely love it. I think it's Leone's best movie besides Once Upon a Time in America, which may not be a selling point because I know Tony's very divisive on that. But it's one worth seeing if you hadn't seen it before, and it's one I think we need to see. We're overdue for the Western, so why not go with a sort of revisionist one?
All right, thank you. And Connor, you're second, right?
Yes, I am, Tony. And there's another thing we're overdue for, and you should know of all people, Tony, talking about a courtroom drama. And I've selected for you the best of courtroom dramas, the absolute best there is. A true standout in the genre. I'm referring, of course, to Otto Preminger's 1959 Anatomy of a Murder, starring none other, Jimmy Stewart, everyone. It's high time. We had him back on the pod as a guest, and I think we can get him. And yes, this is a film that I don't know how to describe it, as just an extremely intense, for the time, take on crime, and just a very realistic portrayal of like the nature of these kind of grisly crimes that can happen, the social dynamics that go into a courtroom, and how a defendant is perceived. It really goes there with like the explicitness of the themes presented. In fact, it is the first Hollywood film in which the word semen is spoken aloud. And that, I don't know how you get any better than that.
Your whole pitch should have just been that. You should have dropped everything else.
I mean, that is that. I mean, at that point, I can just drop the mic, because you got to see it now. But command performance from Jimmy Stewart, great example of naturalism and acting, and just with the Preminger kind of style of just incredible dialogue, and it's a great film to watch. I don't quite know how to explain it's all of its virtues, but it's an old Hollywood movie that just speaks to you. You may not be able to write a thesis about it, but certainly it has its place in time, and it's just so lovingly crafted and with such great actors. I think you would really enjoy it, Tony, and so would the rest of you.
All right, thank you. And Kirk?
All right. Well, as we are filming, it is still October, and I'm going to keep going with the general atmosphere, climate of horror, of spooky. I guess not. This isn't really like supernatural. It's more grounded in reality. But an interesting film from 91, all right, 1991, someone we have not, I believe, had not had on the podcast yet. That is Julia Roberts in Sleeping with the Enemy. Kind of an offbeat one. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this, to be honest. I would probably say Anthony might have seen it. But anyways, it's basically this tale, very concise film. It's kind of a one-note film, but done in a really, really cool way, about, a woman who's trying to get away from an abusive, lethally, abusive relationship. And it is cat and mouse, this horror kind of psychological. Also, obviously, there's, physical harm as well. But it's really kind of cool to see. You have early 90s. You have this kind of budding movie star in Julia Roberts. And it's kind of interesting to see her in a role where we usually think of her, in her leading roles, her Oscar winners, or nominees. But this one is a little off the beaten path. Something, if you're in the mood for a spooky kind of adrenaline pumping ride, it's worth a shot. So, anyways.
All right, thank you, Kirk. And okay, so interesting choices, very different. Let's do some rebuttals in the same order.
All right, let's get the negative out of the way. For Connor and my movie, empty out your bladders. So very long choices there. Let's be honest. So maybe you're not in the mood for something long. Kirk's film, TBS plays great movies sometimes, but I don't know Kirk's movie, but I love the kind of trajectory he's been on with some of these nominations. So something's probably there. Something's interesting. I love Kirk's reaction. Let's see. As for Connor's movie, yeah, Jimmy Stewart's great, but aren't we more serious film thinkers? Like Armand White, do we really believe in interviews with the team, the cast, the crew? When Once Upon a Time in the West, I can't promise anyone coming aboard. Can't promise Dario Argento on the screen. But there's something interesting there. It's a Western you have to see if you haven't seen it before. It's a Western we all should see. It's the thing that kind of inspires, of course, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's a kind of background future there. But something about it. Henry Fonda playing against type as the villain is so interesting. Charles Bronson gives a very haunting performance as a sort of mestizo-like character. And sort of the way the economics, the dirtiness, the grimness of the kind of Wild West is sort of unraveling the mythology of it. It's just all done in this movie, and it's all done so well. I think it's just Leone at his peak. It's just something I would love for us to see. So that'd be my vote.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony. Connor?
This is tough. First of all, I'd just like to address this one factual point, clarification. When I say seamen, I do not mean as in sailors. Okay, I'm sure that word was uttered in an earlier Hollywood film. But anyway, so Anthony's film is truly great. Once Upon a Time in the West is an incredible film I'm a great fan of. Sprawling epic. I forgot that Anatomy of a Murder was actually as long as that. I don't think it's quite as long, but it is a sprawling, huge movie. There's a lot to chew on. It's a great example of the revisionist Western and the kind of spaghetti ethos to the spaghetti Western. And it's a great example. And I think it's like transcendent of that whole genre too, But what would I say? I mean, it's this kind of European, kind of like wants to, has say a lot. It kind of wants to impress you with its grittiness and darkness. And it's not appealing to, right? Nothing like an old Hollywood film to just really just get your motor running in terms of your attachment, your immersion into the scene. Of course, there's an element of, sometimes the kind of period dialogue and can rub people the wrong way. It's not about pure naturalism, but just pure mechanics of the writing, just the well-oiled machine of a Hollywood script, Hollywood actors, of this period. And this is just an example of a movie that just goes pretty far. It's taking a novel that had large ambitions. It's kind of bringing these themes that were only being explored in kind of certain circles to the silver screen, right? And pushing the envelope. And I think it kind of set the stage for New Hollywood itself, to kind of come into being, and all the other kind of more mature and sort of more explicit, films of the late 60s and 70s. So I think it's very interesting in that point. And, that's the only point I can make for it. And I haven't seen Kirk's movie. I'm curious how it seems, what exactly it is. I have no idea. I can't even imagine what this movie is. So I am intrigued by it. But yeah, anyway. I had made my case, obviously the one point about Anatomy of a Murder, its claim to fame, it's hard to resist.
All right, Tony, how much do you value your time? Sleeping with an Enemy is a crisp 100 minutes. All right. Once Upon a Time in the West, 155. Actually, 145. Anatomy of a Murder, 160. What are we doing here?
Yikes. Okay, well.
No, I feel bad, but I don't think it affects his decision at all, obviously. So, but I'm grasping at straws. That's what I'm doing. I will say, this is a vote, Tony. This is a vote for those people who exist between the Hudson River and La Brea Avenue in LA. You got these sycophants, these eggheads over here just pontificating about the meaning of movies and how Buddhism is bad. No, I don't know. Sleeping with the Enemy, it was a 90s hit that people saw. They went to the theater, they bought their junior mints. I don't know. It's kind of it's a genre piece for sure. It doesn't try to do more than it sets out to do, but it does what it does really well. And I think that's kind of admirable. And, I would hope you'd have a visceral reaction to it. All right. That's my pitch.
Yeah. Okay. So, Kirk, you have me in your corner with Spear Cubed. But then I heard that little crack about something that we got on the podcast, and I tilted right back the other way, my friend. No, I don't know. I mean, I would be curious to watch it and see what it is that makes this movie interesting, but I'm more interested in the other two at this particular moment. So I'm going to pass on Sleeping with the
Shocker
for now. Well, maybe with that attitude, Kirk. Yeah, come on, man.
I'm just going to nominate Titanic for the next 150 episodes, guys. Buckle up. It's going to get real uncomfortable in here. No, I'm kidding. Go ahead, Tony.
We should just have a new segment called Titanic and then Mishima, and then we can all decide whether to watch them. It'd be no every week. No, so I'm eliminating that one for now. So honestly, Connor, you did, I think, a better job selling Anthony's movie than selling your own. You're like, well, Anthony's movie is like one of the greatest movies of all time, and I love it, and everyone should see it. But my movie has some cool parts too, I guess. That's kind of how it read. But And honestly, like Anthony and you made an amazing pitch for Once Upon a Time in the West. It does sound really cool. Like I didn't know there were these kind of like the haunting elements, or like the gothic elements Anthony's alluding to. I was not aware of that at all. That makes it be kind of more appealing for me, or more interesting. You know, I'm sure it is genuinely a great film. Man, that's actually really tough. You know, here's the thing. I've been wanting to. Wait, no, I'll ask. Here's what we'll do the tiebreaker. How many of you have seen Anatomy of a Murder? So you just Kirk, you haven't seen it. And then and you've seen Anthony's, but Kirk is not. Okay. So it's tied essentially then. I've been wanting to watch Anatomy of a Murder for like a month plus now. It's been like on the top of my list. But you know what? I'm gonna go Once Upon a Time in the West. That was a close call. It was really, really close. But I think I just Connor, you sold it hard. You made it sound really good.
That was surprising.
Twisted by your own petard, just like I did earlier.
Well, in a way, you know, I pride myself on my fairness to all great movies and all, like 70s kind of movies. You know, if it's old enough, you know, that I have to defend it no matter what.
We're like killing like half a day in the next two movies alone. It's Cloud Atlas and Once Upon a Time in the West.
Hey, I'm happy. I'm happy with this.
In my defense to the audience, after those two recommendations, what the fuck was I going to recommend? I mean, really, guys, we got Sergio Leone, we got Jimmy Stewart, and we got Patrick Bergen from Love Boat or whatever he was in. Anyway.
Kirk, this is the time you go ambitious. This is when you go for broke. This is when you say, I pitched Candy, I pitched The Secret Life of Pets 2. This is when you say, I'm, or something like that.
I was hoping for Return of the King.
The book, or yeah, even like Titanic again. I would have respected that if you brought Titanic to the table this time.
Why? So you could have said no in an even meaner way? All right.
I probably still would have picked Anthony's, but still, I would have respected the chutzpah.
Well, I'll have what she's having.